Donald Trump, who says his whole life has been a bet, is gambling all his chips on a box office economy in 2020. He's out there now accusing his enemies of conspiring against him amid mounting signs that the U.S. economy may be on shaky ground. After a record 10 years of economic growth, recent market volatility and a trade war with China have raised concerns about the possibility of a serious economic downturn. Yet the president's dismissing those warnings and finding new targets to blame for the anxiety. Earlier today, Trump attacked Democrats, as well as the chairman of the Federal Reserve he appointed, writing on Twitter, "Our economy is very strong despite the horrendous lack of vision by Jay Powell and the Fed. But the Democrats are trying to will the economy to be bad for purposes of the 2020 election. Very selfish." Similarly, Trump accused the media last week of trying to crash the economy. And now the New York Times is reporting that in making those attacks, the president is, quote, lashing out at what he believes is a conspiracy of forces arrayed against him. In private conversations with aides and allies, Trump is insisting that his critics are trying to take away what he sees as his calling card for re-election. The Associated Press reports that the president's even wondering if the media and establishment figures are manipulating the data to make him look bad, according to two Republicans close to him. This comes as a new survey today by the National Association for Business Economics finds that, quote, 74% of economists predict the next recession will hit by the end of 2021. In other words, more than 2 years from now. Yet Trump is downplaying the chances that an economic downturn is even possible. Here's how he responded yesterday when asked if his administration has a plan to deal with a potential recession, should one occur.
Are you doing any planning, or are you going to be directing your administration to plan for the possibility of a recession?
I don't see a recession. I mean, the world is in a recession right now. And although that's too big a statement, honestly, I'm prepared for everything. I don't think we're having a recession. We're doing tremendously well. Our consumers are rich. I gave a tremendous tax cut, and they're loaded up with money.
Loaded up with my way the way he talks, grossly conversational there. Despite that rosy outlook, the Associated Press is reporting that privately Trump is growing increasingly worried the economy won't look so good come Election Day. I'm joined now by former U.S. Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts, Ayesha Rascoe, she's White House reporter for NPR, and Charlie Sykes is editor-in-chief of The Bulwark. Charlie, this president sees conspiracies out there. I don't know what he's talking about. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Commerce Department, run by his friend Wilbur Ross. Where are these phony numbers coming from?
Well, Donald Trump always wants to have his own reality, right? And unfortunately, he knows that he owns the economy. This is the strongest card that he has for re-election. So how else is he going to explain all of this, except that there are people who are plotting against him? You know, don't pay attention to what your eyes are telling you. Listen to what I am saying. But this is very dangerous. It is a dangerous situation for a president of the United States who insists on having his own alternative reality. And, of course, you have the cognitive dissonance. If there's no recession, why is he pressuring the Fed for a 100 basis point rate cut? Why are his staffers now talking about proposing a possible payroll tax cut? So he hasn't got his story straight yet, has he?
Well, Ayesha, you know the story? Is he inside aware that the economic news is real?
Well, I don't know. I would think that they would know that the economic news is real. It's coming from his own administration. It's coming from the federal government. But what I think President Trump wants to try to do now is try to put the attention on someone else and say that if there is bad news, it's not my fault. It's Jay Powell's fault. It's the fault of the media. It's the Democrats against me.
Yeah, but is the fault for there being a real economic recession coming, or somebody said there is one coming? Because when unemployment starts to rise again, which it apparently will at some point, although it's a lagging indicator, it's real.
Yeah, and that's the issue, because you can't talk your way out of that, and you can't just blame someone else if there are real economic problems. It does seem like this administration is taking it seriously. Now, I talked to a White House official who said they're not considering a payroll tax cut right now, but they are considering pushing other tax cuts right now. So that, to me, sounds like an administration that's concerned about the economy.
Congressman Frank, what do you think about this with Trump? I didn't know this was coming. All of a sudden, a couple of weeks ago, we started to hear these leading indicators of trouble, and now Trump's already got up the red flags. There's a problem, but he's sort of denying the red flags or blaming them on somebody else.
Yeah, and there's somebody else, by the way, is not just Chairman Powell. He has appointed several Fed governors. He owns the Fed. He's appointed several people there. And, of course, it's part of a pattern for Donald Trump claiming to be the great chief executive. one of the things you want from an executive is to appoint good people. By Donald Trump's judgment, he has appointed incompetent people to run law enforcement, the economy, national security, and the foreign policy of the United States. Those are all people he denounces having appointed. I think what he's doing is kind of tricky for him. If you look at who is now talking in a way that suggests there's weakness in the economy, number one is Donald Trump. There is no way you would be banging away at your own appointees at the Federal Reserve substantially to reduce interest rates and maybe go back into quantitative easing if you didn't think that there was trouble coming. Now, he's got this dilemma because he is, in fact, by banging away at the Fed, contributing to this notion, but he's taking out recession insurance. I think it's pretty clear that Trump is being warned that the rush that we got from his tax cut for the very rich is piddling out, and that things are going to start to turn down, and he's desperately trying to blame somebody else when the bad news comes.
Charlie, here's my question. This was, like a historic tax cut. It was wrong in its values, wrong in its distribution. Everything's wrong about it. In fact, I don't know anybody, regular people, got anything out of it. And most importantly, it had no macroeconomic juice to it. Nothing really got going with the economy. It wasn't a supply side or any kind of tax cut that got long-term. And now they're whispering about a payroll tax, which basically, we have an underfunded Medicare account, we have underfunded Social Security, all that stuff. But to just start playing around with a little cap pistol like that has a short-term impact, temporary cut in payroll tax sounds like a Band-Aid. What do you think?
Well, they've tried this. Yes, it's definitely a Band-Aid. I mean, here's the part of the problem is they fired all of the bullets that they would have. We've had virtually zero interest rates for so long, and the tax cut has, created $1 trillion a year deficits. So if the country does plunge into a recession, how is Congress and the president going to be able to deal with it? Are they going to expand the deficit beyond $1 trillion? Are they going to have a massive spending program, more tax cuts? So this is part of the problem, that their options are incredibly limited here.
Thank you. Barney, that's the same thing I keep thinking about when you have $1 trillion deficit to start with, when you got zero cost of money. You have monetary policy, which is so wild to start with. What's left in your toolbox when you really face a horror?
You're right. I mean, Trump retires the trophy as the uber Keynesian of all time. He has done more to stimulate in the short term the economy with fiscal deficits and tax cuts. And here's the problem. One logical thing to do right now would be to begin to implement a good infrastructure program to provide employment to people who didn't necessarily go to college, to increase the productivity. The fundamental problem is that he spent the infrastructure money on a tax cut for the very rich.
Thank you.
The argument was that this would improve productivity. They've gone away with that. Remember, the argument was that if we get this tax cut for the corporations, then we will get 3% growth. No one thinks that's coming. The question is, that's out the window. So the fundamental curse that this administration inflicted on itself was in its first year to take the money that should have gone for a sensible infrastructure program that could have been a bipartisan one and put it into a tax cut for the rich, which had a short-term effect but no long-term benefit.
Each of this strikes me all the time, the same way the former congressman puts it. I think you only have a few tools in your chest. You can cut spending, raise during inflation. You can increase, cut taxes during a potential recession. You can work monetary policy to some extent to create more money. More money will actually, if it's going to be invested. Right now, I'm hearing the country's, the rich people, the corporations are swirling with cash. They don't want to invest it. They don't believe in it. They don't believe in this rock'em sock'em economy of Trump's. And so what happened was the rich got all the money. They bought back stock at the corporate level. They benefited from it in terms of their own wealth because you buy back stock, you own more, right? Yeah. Everything worked out for them. And now we have a situation with no more tools. Facing perhaps economic trouble.
And that's the fear, is what happens now if there is a recession. Is President Trump, is this administration ready for it? And this is not an administration that has been great with crisis and usually is creating the crisis on their own.
The biggest thing he did, and I agree with the congressman on this, betrayal.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.